The first sound of the day was rain. Soft, steady, like someone tapping gently on the window reminding the city of Austin that even the sun needs rest. Elias Carter opened his eyes at 4:31 a.m. He didn't need an alarm. His body, disciplined by decades of 5 a.m. meetings and early flights, simply knew when to wake. He sat up slowly, stretching his back, and looked toward the small digital clock beside the bed. Today wasn't supposed to be special. Just another flight. Austin to Seattle. Routine, efficient, predictable. At least, that's what he thought. He moved through his quiet home, the kind of house that told stories without saying a word. Photos of his daughter, Lena, lining the hallway. Awards stacked on one shelf, not displayed. Books about leadership, justice, and silence. The kitchen lights hummed to life. Elias brewed his coffee black. No sugar, no cream. The rain was still whispering outside when the screen of his phone lit up. Lena. FaceTime. He smiled before answering. Her face appeared, hair in a messy bun, morning sunlight pouring into her dorm room at UCLA. "Morning, Dad," she said, half yawning, half grinning. "Morning, baby. You up early?" "I've got a sociology paper due," she said, rubbing her eyes. "On systemic bias." "You're kind of my case study." Elias chuckled, low and warm. "Should I be proud or worried?" "Proud," she said. "You made it. But," she paused, "do you ever get tired of having to prove you belong?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at his coffee, at the small swirl of steam rising from the cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Sometimes," he said, "but I learned something a long time ago. Lena, you don't fight every battle with your fists. Some you fight with your silence. Let them underestimate you, then show them the truth." Lena tilted her head. "You mean, like patience?" "Patience," he said, "and purpose." Outside, the rain picked up, tapping harder now, almost impatient. Elias checked his watch. 5:12 a.m. His flight Horizon Air 726 was scheduled to depart at 8:00. He still had time, enough time to think, enough time to remember. He walked back to his office, a room filled with clean lines and quiet power. On the wall hung a single-framed quote, words his mother once said when he was 15. "Respect won't always greet you, but dignity is something you carry yourself." He smiled faintly. Every big decision he'd made since then, every board meeting, every merger, every speech had begun with those words in his head. Today's trip was supposed to be simple. Fly to Seattle, meet with Horizon Air's board, finalize a new contract that would expand Carter Dynamics' renewable energy systems across their fleet. But more than that, Elias had another reason for flying commercial instead of taking the company jet. He wanted to see how Horizon treated people, how its employees treated passengers when no one was watching. It was something he did often, quietly, without announcement, a secret audit, hidden behind calm eyes and a business-class ticket. He took a sip of his coffee and opened his laptop. The inbox was already full staff updates, investment reports, policy drafts. He typed a few quick replies, then closed the screen. He wanted to be present today. He put on his dark navy suit, crisp white shirt, silver cufflinks, small details that said professional, not CEO. He didn't like drawing attention. He believed respect was earned through consistency, not appearance. Before leaving, he grabbed a photo of Lena from the table, a picture of her at 10 years old, holding a paper airplane. He tucked it into the inside pocket of his briefcase. As he stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. The street was quiet, except for the low rumble of distant thunder. He took a deep breath of the cool morning air. Something about today felt different. He couldn't name it, but it felt like the pause before a storm. At the airport, the sky was the color of steel. Lights reflected off the wet pavement as cars pulled up and left again. Elias walked through the automatic doors, suitcase rolling behind him. The air inside smelled like coffee, disinfectant, and early flights. Announcements echoed overhead boarding calls, security reminders, the same rehearsed voices of efficiency. He looked around. Families juggling luggage, business travelers hunched over phones, people living in motion. For a moment, he just stood there, watching humanity in transit. He felt something both humbling and haunting about airports. Everyone equal for a moment, stripped down to ID cards and boarding passes. At least, that's how it should be. He checked his digital wallet again. Horizon Air 726. Seat 1A, first class. Everything confirmed. He smiled slightly. Let's see how Horizon handles its values today. He didn't know, of course, that in less than 3 hours, that small test would turn into a national headline, that the next 12 minutes on that plane would freeze an entire airline. That silence would become a statement heard across the country. But for now, he was just a man at the check-in line, quietly waiting his turn, calm, composed, carrying a coffee cup and a briefcase. The morning bell had rung. The world just hadn't realized what was coming. The airport was waking up. Soft hums of conveyor belts, footsteps echoing across marble floors, the smell of roasted coffee blending with jet fuel. Elias Carter adjusted the strap of his leather briefcase as he joined the first-class check-in line. The digital clock above the counter read 6:12 a.m., right on time. He believed in arriving early, not out of anxiety, but out of respect. Being early, he often said, is how you tell the world you value its time. 2 agents worked behind the counter. The younger one, a woman with chestnut hair pulled into a ponytail, greeted passengers with the kind of smile that looked both rehearsed and nervous. Her name tag read Stacy. When it was Elias's turn, she looked up, her smile faltering just a bit. Her eyes flickered between his face and the ticket on the screen. "Good morning," he said kindly, sliding his ID and phone forward. Checking in for Horizon Air 726, Seat 1A. Stacy hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. Her voice, when it came, was polite but tight. "Sir, can I just verify your ticket again?" Elias kept his tone even. "Of course." Her fingers clicked rapidly on the keyboard. The man behind Elias, tall, wearing a blazer, Bluetooth in one ear, shifted impatiently. "Can we move this along? Some of us have flights to catch." Stacy looked flustered, glancing between Elias and the other passenger. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm just confirming something in the system." Elias nodded. "Take your time." He'd seen this before. The glance, the pause, the subtle question behind their eyes. Does he really belong here? After 30 seconds that felt like 2 minutes, Stacy forced a small laugh. "It's just unusual. The system marked your reservation for additional verification." "Unusual," how Elias asked gently. She hesitated again. "It doesn't happen often for first-class passengers." The man behind him snorted. "Probably some mix-up with those credit card upgrades. Happens all the time." Elias turned slightly, his gaze calm but steady. "I didn't upgrade," he said simply. "I booked it." The man muttered something under his breath, something Elias chose not to hear. Moments later, Stacy's supervisor, Mark Henson, appeared, middle-aged, tidy haircut, voice sharp from years of authority. "What's the issue here?" Stacy stammered. "System flagged his ticket for review." Mark studied Elias's ID. His eyes scanned the name, then lifted to the man in front of him. "Mr. Carter. Carter Dynamics. Correct, yes." Mark nodded, pretending recognition. "Ah, must be a glitch." He typed quickly, then said, "You're all set." "Sir." Elias gave a small smile. "Thank you." No apology. None expected. He'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't about forcing remorse from others. It was about staying steady when they showed none. As he walked away, the businessman behind him leaned toward Mark. "What was that about?" Mark shrugged. "No idea. But these verifications are usually for, well, special cases." Elias didn't need to turn around. He already knew. Some words echo even when unspoken. He took a slow breath as he passed security. The officer checked his ID and boarding pass, waved him through. Everything routine. Yet under the normal rhythm of the airport, something faintly wrong pulsed like a hidden wire. He found himself thinking of Lena again, of her paper on systemic bias, of her voice on the screen that morning. "Do you ever get tired of having to prove you belong?" The truth was yes. Some days, more than others. Inside the terminal, bright light from the glass ceiling spilled across his path. He followed the signs toward the first-class lounge. Travelers brushed past him in quick bursts of motion, some polite, some indifferent. A few glancing with the same quiet skepticism he'd felt since the counter. The lounge entrance was marked by a silver archway. A woman in uniform stood beside a podium, greeting guests with professional warmth. "Good morning. Boarding pass. Please." Elias handed her his phone. She scanned it, then frowned slightly. "Sir, I'm sorry. This access is for elite business members." He raised an eyebrow. "It is platinum tier." She looked down again, double-checking. "May I see your membership card?" He reached into his wallet, pulling out the sleek platinum card embossed with his name. The woman blinked. "Oh, my apologies, please. Come in." "No harm done," he said softly. But her cheeks flushed as she stepped aside. Inside, the lounge was quiet. Soft jazz drifted through the air, the kind of music meant to calm people with power. Leather chairs, polished tables, the faint hiss of espresso machines. Elias chose a seat near the window overlooking the runway. He opened his tablet and reviewed his presentation slides projections for Horizon's new energy partnership. It was, ironically, a plan built on diversity, inclusion, and sustainability. He smiled without humor. "We can build cleaner skies," he thought, "but can we build kinder hearts?" A few seats away, two men in suits whispered. One pointed discreetly toward him. "He's in first class." Didn't think the rest of the sentence disappeared into their coffee cups. Elias focused on the raindrops sliding down the glass, each one tracing its own path, separate yet connected. He found calm in that image. Then a voice interrupted. "Mind if I sit?" An older woman, gray hair neatly pinned, held a cup of tea. Her badge read, "Margaret Lee." "Please," Elias said, gesturing to the seat across. She smiled kindly. "Some people around here look at you like they've never seen excellence in black before. Don't let it bother you." He looked up, surprised. "You noticed?" "I'm too old not to," she said. "My husband was one of the first black pilots at United. 40 years of polite disbelief from passengers, and he never lost his grace. Said it confused the haters." Elias chuckled. "Your husband sounds like someone I'd have liked to meet." Margaret's eyes softened. He passed last year, but he would have liked you too. Silence settled between them, gentle, not awkward. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through faint clouds, golden light scattering across the tarmac. After a while, Margaret stood. It was nice talking to you, Mr. Carter. And for what it's worth, I hope your flight is peaceful. He nodded. I hope so too. But peace, he knew, had a way of slipping through the smallest cracks. A boarding announcement came over the speaker. Horizon Air Flight 726 to Seattle boarding begins at Gate 18B in 15 minutes. Elias packed up his tablet, thanked the lounge attendant, and made his way toward the gate. The walkway buzzed with travelers, rolling luggage, voices overlapping in waves. When he arrived, the same supervisor, Mark Henson, stood near the counter, speaking with another attendant, a tall woman named Rita. They didn't notice him at first. He overheard Mark mutter, "We'll handle it quietly this time." Rita nodded, eyes flicking to the manifest screen. Elias cleared his throat gently. "Is boarding open for first class?" Rita startled, then forced a quick smile. "Just a few moments, what?" "Sir?" Her tone carried that brittle politeness, the kind that hides discomfort behind protocol. He waited near the window, watching a plane taxi across the runway. Its engines roared softly, a sound like distant thunder returning. 12 minutes. That was all it would take later. 12 minutes that would turn this quiet morning into a national conversation. But for now, Elias was just a man holding a boarding pass. A man who believed that patience, like truth, always found its way to the surface. He took another breath and whispered to himself, "Let's see what happens next." The line began to move. Rita lifted the microphone and announced boarding for first class. Her voice trembled ever so slightly. Elias stepped forward, unaware that the next encounter at the edge of that jet bridge would test every ounce of his calm. The boarding air was a patchwork of impatience. Rolling suitcases clicked against the tile. Phones buzzed. Children tugged at sleeves. The loudspeaker called numbers in its usual neutral tone. But every few seconds the sound of human irritation cut through it. People in a hurry to leave. People desperate to arrive. Elias Carter stood a few feet away from Gate 18B, the boarding pass glowing on his phone screen. His name, his seat, his flight all correct. He'd checked twice. Around him, travelers formed loose lines, eyes flicking to the display board, fingers tightening around handles. Rita, the gate agent, adjusted her scarf and tried to smile at each passenger. Her voice carried the warmth of routine. "Good morning. Welcome aboard. Enjoy your flight." Yet when her gaze landed on Elias, her rhythm faltered. It was small, barely half a second, but enough for him to notice. He stepped forward when she announced, "Now boarding first class, rows 1 through 3. "Good morning," he said as he handed her his phone. Rita scanned it. The scanner beeped, then flashed red. She frowned. Tried again. Another red flash. "That's odd," she murmured. "It's not showing as cleared." "It's confirmed on my end," Elias replied, his voice calm. She nodded, but hesitated. "Would you mind waiting just a moment?" "Sir?" The line behind him tightened. Someone muttered, "Here we go again." Rita called over her shoulder, "Mark, can you take a look?" The supervisor walked over, recognition dawning on his face. "Mr. Carter." "Right, yes," Elias said evenly. "Still me." Mark forced a smile. "Seems like the system didn't sync the seat assignment. Might just take a second." Elias glanced at the screen Rita was using. His name appeared clearly. Seat 1A, verified ticket, boarding group priority. Still, the gate refused to open for him. Passengers behind him shifted, restless. A man in a gray hoodie muttered loud enough to hear, "Why do they always hold up the line?" Elias turned slightly. "They'll sort it out soon." The man scoffed. "Yeah, sure." Rita tried again. The scanner blinked red for the third time. She looked at Mark helplessly. Mark's smile tightened. "Sir, could you step aside for a moment while we resolve this?" Elias inhaled slowly. "Is there a specific reason I need to step aside?" "It's just procedure," Mark replied, his tone soft but firm. Elias's expression didn't change. "Procedure that only applies to me." A few passengers were already staring. Cameras lifted discreetly, the glow of phone lenses catching the tension like static in the air. "Sir, please," Rita said quietly. "This will only take a minute." He took one step back, still within sight of the gate, not leaving, only allowing space. They whispered behind the counter, words like verification. "Flagged." "Security" floated into the air. Elias checked his watch. 7:48 a.m. The flight was scheduled to push back in 12 minutes. Mark picked up a phone, dialed a short code, then hung up quickly. His expression flickered some mix of annoyance and unease. Finally, Rita looked up. It should work now. She scanned the code again. The gate clicked green this time, and she forced a bright smile. "You're all set, Mr. Carter. Enjoy your flight." He nodded slightly. "Thank you." As he stepped forward, a passenger behind him whispered just loud enough, "Guess the computer didn't like his kind." He didn't turn around, didn't give it power. But his jaw tightened for just a moment before he released the tension. Years of practice had taught him that control was its own kind of strength. The jet bridge smelled faintly of metal and recycled air. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He moved steadily forward, hearing the muffled shuffle of passengers behind him, the distant murmur of the crew greeting early boarders. At the doorway of the aircraft, a flight attendant stood ready, neat uniform, polite expression. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said. Her name tag read Paula. Her voice was professional but hesitant, like she was searching his face for context. Elias offered a nod. "Thank you." She glanced quickly at his boarding pass, then at the seating chart on her tablet. A crease formed between her eyebrows. "Seat one way," she asked. "That's right." Paula looked over her shoulder toward the front of the cabin. Just a moment." She turned slightly away and tapped on her device again. Elias waited. Other passengers entered, brushing past him. The cabin smelled of citrus and coffee. He could see the leather headrest of seat 1A, his seat gleaming under the soft lighting. Paula returned with an apologetic tone that didn't quite sound like apology. "Sir, there seems to be a double booking. Another passenger is assigned to that seat." "Interesting," he said quietly. "Would you mind showing me?" She hesitated, then rotated the screen. Indeed, two names appeared, Elias Carter and Robert Daniels. Elias's voice stayed steady. "I see. And what's the policy when that happens?" "Well, usually," she said, lowering her voice, "we reseat one passenger in economy until it's sorted." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you're suggesting?" Paula flushed. "I'm just following procedure, sir." Elias leaned slightly forward, his tone calm but edged with quiet authority. "Then follow it correctly. I'll remain in the seat I purchased. You can sort the duplicate when the other party arrives." Something in his voice made her pause. Not anger, just certainty. He stepped into the cabin, his polished shoes silent against the carpet, and placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment. As he settled into 1A, he noticed passengers glancing discreetly his way. A tall man in a navy suit entered a moment later, phone in hand, talking loudly. "Yeah, seat 1A. I'm already late." He stopped when he saw Elias sitting there. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." Paula appeared instantly, tension written across her smile. "Mr. Daniels, there's been a mix-up. We're resolving it." Robert Daniels glanced at Elias, then at Paula. "Well, I booked this weeks ago." Elias didn't move. So did I. For a second, the air in the cabin felt electric. 2 men, 2 claims, 1 truth waiting to surface. Paula's voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Daniels, could I ask you to wait in the galley for just a moment while we confirm?" He huffed but obeyed, muttering under his breath. Elias watched quietly as she walked away again. The hum of boarding filled the silence bags rolling, overhead bins closing, engines faint in the distance. He placed his phone face down on the armrest, closed his eyes briefly, and exhaled. Jazz melodies drifted faintly through his memory, the sound of Blue and Green, the song he always played before big meetings. When he opened his eyes again, Paula was returning, accompanied by Mark Henson. "Mr. Carter," Mark began carefully, "we're very sorry for the confusion. It appears your ticket and Mr. Daniels were both confirmed due to an internal duplication." Elias tilted his head slightly. "And your resolution," Mark hesitated. "We'd like to offer a seat in business class while we correct the issue. You'll still receive first-class service." Elias's gaze didn't waver. "No, thank you. I'll keep the seat I paid for." Paula shifted nervously. "Sir, we're just trying to make things easier for everyone." Elias's tone stayed gentle but firm. "You can't make things easier by making them unequal." The statement hung in the air, quiet, heavy, impossible to argue with. A woman across the aisle lowered her magazine slightly, eyes sharp with interest. Another passenger raised a phone discreetly. The cabin had gone still. Mark exhaled. "Let me speak to the captain." He turned and walked toward the cockpit. Elias sat back, hands resting calmly on his knees. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But something deeper than anger stirred inside him, a quiet ache that came from familiarity. He'd lived through too many polite versions of the same insult. Through the open curtain, he could see the terminal window, the clouds shifting in the sky. Somewhere out there, planes were taking off without issue, carrying passengers who never had to justify their seat. He thought of Lena again, her voice, her question, her faith in him. When Mark returned 5 minutes later, his face had lost its practiced calm. "Mr. Carter," he said softly, "we're going to delay takeoff while corporate reviews this." Elias nodded once. "That's wise." Behind him, murmurs spread through the cabin. People checking phones, recording short clips, whispering names. A few recognized him, now his face from interviews, from business magazines. Paula swallowed hard. I didn't realize he looked at her. Eyes kind but steady. "Now you do." Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The light over the runway gleamed gold. Somewhere in the hum of engines and whispers, the morning shifted. In exactly 12 minutes, everything would change. The cabin door shut with a hiss, sealing in the scent of coffee and recirculated air. Elias Carter stayed seated in 1A, back straight, hands folded neatly in his lap. The world outside blurred, behind layers of glass runway lights smeared like gold paint over gray. Inside, Murmurs pulsed like low music passengers whispering about the delay, about the man in the first row who wasn't supposed to be there. Across the aisle, Robert Daniels scrolled on his phone with theatrical irritation. He was still waiting for someone to come fix the mistake that had dared to put Elias in his place. Occasionally, he glanced over, the corners of his mouth curling in disbelief, as if the universe had committed some social offense by mixing seats and skin tones. Paula, the flight attendant, paced between the galley and the cabin curtain. She tried to appear busy, checking service trays, adjusting headrest covers, aligning napkins that were already perfectly aligned, but her hands trembled slightly each time her gaze brushed over Elias. When she finally approached him, her smile was tight as wire. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to, thank you for your patience." He looked up at her, voice quiet but measured. "Patience is easier when you've had practice." Paula swallowed. "We're, still waiting for clearance to depart. I understand." His tone wasn't angry. It was calm in a way that made her even more uneasy. The captain's voice came over the intercom, professional and smooth. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief hold before pushback. We'll update you shortly." A few passengers groaned. A woman in 2B muttered, "Always something." Elias closed his eyes for a moment. He could hear the rustle of clothes, the metallic click of seatbelts, the faint jazz melody leaking from someone's headphones in the row behind. All ordinary sounds, yet beneath them, a different frequency hummed tension, quiet and electric. He turned slightly toward the window. Beyond the glass, a line of raindrops gathered on the edge, trembling, deciding whether to fall. That hesitation reminded him of every meeting, every boardroom, every dinner where he had been politely underestimated. The world's small pauses before acceptance. A shadow crossed the aisle. Robert Daniels leaned closer, voice low but sharp. "Look, I don't mean to make this a thing, but you must realize they mixed up the seats. I've flown this route for years. That's my spot." Elias opened his eyes. "Gaze steady. I'm sure the airline can clarify that." Robert huffed. "You could just move to business class and avoid all this drama." Elias studied him for a long second. "If I gave up every seat I earned, I'd never sit anywhere worth being." The words weren't loud, but they landed like a weight. Robert blinked, muttered something under his breath, and sank back into his own seat. Paula approached again, this time carrying a glass of water. "Something to drink while we wait." "Thank you," Elias said, taking it. The cool glass felt grounding. He set it down carefully, then reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out the small photo of Lena. Her 10-year-old self smiled back from a paper airplane she'd folded. He remembered that day the first time she'd seen him win an award. She'd whispered, "They finally see you, Daddy." He'd answered, "Maybe. But I'll know we've won when no one has to prove they belong." The hum of the aircraft deepened as the engines powered lightly. But still, no movement toward the runway. Every minute felt longer. From the galley, he could hear Rita whispering to Mark on her phone. Snippets of words drifted through the air. Corporate. Yes, he's still on board. Seat conflict. Then a pause. He's calm. Just sitting there. Mark's voice came faintly in response. "Keep it that way." Elias caught his reflection in the darkened window. For a second, the image looked older, wearier, not from age, but from the repetition of moments like this. One moments where his calm became a mirror for other people's fear. He thought about calling his assistant, Anna, to check in with Horizon's leadership team. But something stopped him. He wanted to see how far they would go before they remembered who he was. Another 5 minutes passed. The cabin crew moved quietly, eyes flicking toward him, then away. And one attendant, a younger man named Leo, brushed by and whispered, "I'm sorry about all this, sir." Elias turned his head slightly. "You didn't cause it." Leo nodded and kept walking. Sometimes apologies were just echoes of guilt, not responsibility. Then came the sound of the cockpit door unlocking. The captain, Miller, stepped out, a tall man with streaks of gray at his temples, posture straight from years of command. His tone was formal but respectful. "Mr. Carter, may I have a word?" Elias rose slowly. "Of course." The captain gestured toward the galley. The two men stood slightly apart from the passengers, voices low. "I've just received a message from Horizon's regional office," Captain Miller said. "They're reviewing the issue. Apparently, your reservation triggered some kind of internal security flag." Elias's brows lifted slightly. "Security flag. Yes, sir. Something about an ID verification mismatch. They're rechecking the data." Elias's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I've been using the same ID for 25 years. Miller sighed quietly. "I understand how this looks. I just want you to know I'm doing my best to keep the cabin calm." "I appreciate that," Elias said. "But the cabin isn't the problem. The system is." The captain hesitated, as if weighing whether to ask the question forming behind his eyes. "Finally," he said softly, "do you want to deplane while they sort it out? It might be more comfortable to wait in the lounge." Elias shook his head once. "No, Captain, I'll stay right here." Miller held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded. "Understood." When he returned to the cockpit, whispers spread like ripples across water. Passengers speculated in half-sentences. A man muttered, "Probably some VIP thing." Another answered, "Or a security concern." Elias sat back down. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. His silence filled the space louder than defense ever could. He reached for his phone, typed a brief message to Anna. "Don't intervene yet. I want to see how long it takes." Then he turned the phone face down again. Outside the window, sunlight had begun to break through the clouds, turning the wet tarmac into a mirror of gold. A single line of light ran along the edge of the wing, like a promise waiting to be kept. Rita walked by, checking seatbelts. When she reached him, she stopped. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean for this to happen." He studied her expression. Genuine worry. Not malice. "Meaning well doesn't erase what happens," he said gently, "but learning from it can." Her eyes glistened. She nodded and moved on. The intercom chimed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing an additional delay due to a technical review. Thank you for your patience." Elias looked at his watch. 12 minutes had passed since boarding had paused. 12 minutes of waiting, whispering, watching. He thought again of Lena's voice that morning. "Do you ever get tired of having to prove you belong?" "Yes," he whispered under his breath. "But maybe today they'll remember why they asked me to partner with them in the first place." Somewhere behind him, a phone clicked as another passenger started recording. The air seemed to hold its breath. The silence was no longer passive. It had become a force. Every second of restraint was power measured in decibels unheard. And soon, that silence would ground an entire plane. The minutes stretched like rubber bands, thin and trembling, waiting to snap. The plane was still grounded at the gate, passengers restless in their seats. The air carried the metallic chill of unease. Elias Carter sat motionless in 1A, his fingers laced loosely together, his face unreadable. His silence had weight now, not passive, but deliberate. It was the stillness before a decision. Captain Miller had returned to the cockpit, and the crew avoided eye contact, each of them pretending the tension was procedural. Rita adjusted the curtain between classes again and again. Paula stood near the galley, whispering into her radio. Robert Daniels sighed audibly every few minutes, exaggerating his inconvenience. "This is ridiculous," he said to anyone who would listen. "I've never seen service this sloppy." A woman across the aisle, Helen Brooks, quietly lifted her phone and began recording. She didn't like what she was seeing, the subtle discomfort that always seemed to land on the wrong shoulders. Her instincts told her something was wrong. Elias looked out the window, the sunlight reflecting faintly in his eyes. He could see the reflection of his own face on the glass calm, steady, but not unfeeling. He'd spent his entire life turning indignity into discipline. But this moment was different. This wasn't just about him. It was about every quiet apology, every subtle doubt, every time his competence had been questioned in rooms he'd built himself. He unlocked his phone and called his assistant. "Anna." The call connected instantly. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said. Her tone was crisp, professional. But when she noticed the low noise of an aircraft behind him, her voice softened. "You're already on board, I am," he said. "But the flight hasn't moved." "Mechanical?" "No," he said. "Human." There was a pause. "What happened?" "Double booking. They asked me to give up my seat," he said. "And then the system flagged my ticket for verification." Anna exhaled sharply. "Again." "Yes, again." His tone didn't carry anger, only tired familiarity. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Connect me with Horizon's executive line. But wait for my cue before saying anything. Just stay on standby. Understood." He ended the call and placed the phone face down. The reflection of his hand trembled slightly in the surface of the glass. He didn't like confrontation, but sometimes silence needed a voice to carry its meaning. Paula returned. "Mr. Carter," she began, her tone caught between fear and formality. "We're still waiting for clearance. I promise we're doing everything possible." He looked up at her and said softly, "You're doing everything possible to avoid accountability." She flinched. "That's not fair." "Neither is what's happening," he replied gently. The words sank into her like cold water. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, retreating down the aisle. Mark Henson reappeared at the front of the cabin, sweat glistening near his temple. He spoke quietly to Captain Miller, who nodded once before glancing toward 1A. Something in the captain's expression shifted the uneasy respect of a man beginning to realize the scale of his mistake. Passengers were growing louder. "We've been sitting here 30 minutes. One man complained. Another added, "What's the holdup?" "Just take off." Helen Brooks stood up, her voice clear and calm. "The holdup," she said to no one and everyone, "is discrimination." The cabin went silent for a second, then erupted in murmurs. Paula rushed over to hush her. But the moment had already changed. People were watching now, really watching. Elias finally reached for his phone. "Anna," he said, his voice low but precise. "Connect me to Horizon's regional director, Patricia Reynolds." He waited as the line clicked twice before a composed female voice answered, "Mr. Carter, this is Patricia. Is everything all right?" "Not yet," he said. "What seems to be the issue?" You'll find it under Flight 726. Austin to Seattle, he said. Seat 1A. Apparently. Your system doesn't believe I exist. Patricia's voice sharpened. Excuse me. I've been asked to move from my seat. Then told the ticket needed verification. We're still on the ground because of it. There was a brief pause, the kind that meant someone was already typing furiously. Mr. Carter, Patricia said slowly, you're flying with Horizon today. Yes, he said, as a paying customer, not as a partner. This was supposed to be an anonymous evaluation of your service standards. Another silence. Then, in a tone that carried both dread and formality, understood. I'll take immediate action. Good, Elias said, because I'm giving you 12 minutes to fix this before the story leaves this cabin. He ended the call and placed the phone back on the tray. The number echoed in his mind 12 minutes. It wasn't random. It was the same time he'd waited this morning at check-in. The same time people hesitated before treating him like he belonged. 12 minutes enough to measure a person's integrity. Paula approached again, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Carter, was that a corporate call? Yes. Are you? She hesitated. Are you with the company? He didn't answer directly. I believe you're about to find out. Rita peeked into the cabin from the front door, headset pressed to her ear. She looked pale. Mark hurried to her side. They spoke in rushed whispers. Then Mark disappeared into the galley to make another call. The passengers were restless again, but now their whispers carried curiosity instead of annoyance. Who is he? Someone asked. He sounds important. Elias remained still. The only movement was the faint flicker of sunlight over his cufflinks. Exactly 9 minutes later, Patricia called back. Mr. Carter, she said quickly, we've confirmed everything. You are the registered passenger for Seat 1A. There was no duplicate. It was a manual override. By whom, he asked? Gate staff under Mark Henson's authorization. He nodded slowly. I see. I've already informed Captain Miller. She continued. He's to hold the aircraft. I'm dispatching a compliance team immediately. Do you want to speak to the passengers? Not yet, Elias said. Let the silence speak first. He hung up and looked out the window again. The runway lights shimmered, mirroring the quiet fury in his eyes. The truth was beginning to move now, like pressure under ice. Mark re-entered the cabin, his expression stiff. Mr. Carter, he began. I've just been informed the corporate is handling the matter. I sincerely apologize for Elias cut in gently. For what? Exactly, Mark hesitated. For the misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. Elias said. There was an assumption. His tone wasn't raised, but every word struck like a gavel. Mark swallowed hard, color rising in his cheeks. Of course, sir. At that moment, Captain Miller appeared again, his voice carrying through the front rows. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be pausing departure while an internal issue is resolved. Thank you for your patience. Robert Daniels threw up his hands. Unbelievable. Elias looked over, calm as still water. Yes, he said quietly. It is. The hush that followed felt heavier than noise. When Patricia's team arrived minutes later, 2 ethics officers in dark suits, the cabin became a theater of watching eyes. They spoke briefly with Mark, who stepped aside. Then they turned to Elias. Mr. Carter, one said, thank you for your patience. We're handling the review. Elias inclined his head. Make it thorough. They nodded. As they left to interview the crew, Helen Brooks caught his eye from across the aisle and mouthed silently, Thank you. He gave her a small nod. the kind that meant stay steady. Outside, the engines powered down. The plane wasn't moving. The world was. In those 12 minutes, everything had turned. The aircraft had gone still. The hum of its engines was gone, replaced by a strange kind of silence, not peaceful, not tense, but waiting. Every passenger could feel that something larger than a seating issue was unfolding. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias Carter sat upright in seat 1A, expression steady. His composure had become the quiet center of the storm. Mark Henson stood 2 rows away, pretending to look busy on his tablet while every bead of sweat on his forehead betrayed the truth. Paula and Rita whispered near the galley, glancing back every few seconds. And Captain Miller was once again on the phone with operations, voice low and clipped, across the aisle. Helen Brooks had stopped recording. Her phone was now resting in her lap, but the camera light still glowed faintly. She wasn't missing a word. Beside her, a young man in a hoodie asked softly, "What's really going on?" Helen tilted her head toward Elias. "That man is Elias Carter, CEO of Carter Dynamics, the airline's biggest partner in renewable infrastructure." The young man blinked. "You're serious. I've seen his interviews," she said. "If they embarrassed him, this is going to be a story they can't bury." In the cockpit, Captain Miller rubbed the bridge of his nose. Patricia Reynolds' voice came through the headset, clear but urgent. "Captain, confirm for me. Has the passenger remained calm?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Perfectly calm." "Good," she replied. "Then I'm authorizing immediate action. Mr. Carter's identity and boarding pass are fully verified. You're to remove the supervisor and any crew who engaged in discriminatory conduct before this aircraft departs." Miller froze. "Remove them." "Correct. Compliance officers are at the gate. Escort them off now." He hesitated. "That'll delay the flight another hour. Minimum." Patricia's tone hardened. "Better an hour late than a lawsuit that lasts a year. Do it." Miller turned, his decision made. He stepped out of the cockpit and gestured for Paula and Mark to meet him at the galley. His expression had changed the wary professionalism, replaced by something closer to resolve. "Mark," he said quietly, "corporates made their ruling. You're relieved of duty effective immediately. They'll debrief you at the gate." Mark's mouth fell open. "What you can't, I can," Miller said firmly. "And I have to. Please collect your belongings." Passengers nearby gasped as Mark's voice rose. "This is ridiculous. I followed procedure." Elias didn't turn his head, but his voice cut through the air with steady precision. "You followed prejudice, not procedure." Mark's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue. But then the compliance officers appeared at the front of the cabin, 2 sharp-suited women with badges. "Mr. Henson, Ms. Cooper," one said to Paula, "please step off the aircraft." Paula froze, color draining from her face. "Me? Yes, ma'am. You were involved in the seat reassignment." "I didn't," she began, but the officer interrupted softly. "You did. We'll take your statement inside." The passengers murmured, some confused, others whispering with satisfaction. Robert Daniels sank into his seat, his earlier arrogance dissolving into embarrassment. Paula and Mark reluctantly gathered their things and exited the plane. The door closed behind them with a mechanical thud that sounded almost symbolic of the closing of one story and the beginning of another. Captain Miller faced the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be replacing 2 members of the crew before departure. Please remain seated." The announcement sent ripples through the passengers. Some clapped softly, others exchanged glances that said, "Something real just happened here." Helen leaned toward Elias. "They're gone," she whispered. Elias nodded once. "They had to be." Rita approached timidly. "Mr. Carter, I just want to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how serious this was." He turned to her. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the quiet weight of truth. "You realized enough to stay silent." Rita's throat tightened. "I know. I'll do better." "Good," he said. "Then start now. Tell the passengers the truth about what happened." Her eyes widened. "You want me to announce it? I want you to reclaim your voice," he said gently. She hesitated, then nodded and walked toward the intercom. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice wavering, "earlier today, a seat conflict occurred because a supervisor questioned a passenger's right to sit in first class. That passenger is Mr. Elias Carter, one of Horizon Air's major business partners. He was treated unfairly. Corporate has acted accordingly, and the flight will now continue under new supervision." The cabin went silent. Then, a few passengers began clapping. Others joined. The sound swelled softly, polite but powerful. It wasn't about cheering for authority, it was acknowledgement, a collective exhale of decency. Elias didn't smile. He simply nodded once, his eyes thoughtful. Captain Miller returned to the intercom. "We'll begin pre-flight procedures in 10 minutes. Thank you for your patience." The engines began humming again, low and steady. Outside, the runway shimmered under the morning light. But inside, the shift was more profound. The energy of the cabin had changed not just relief, but reflection, the kind of silence that makes people question themselves. Helen leaned closer. "Do you ever get used to moments like this?" Elias looked at her, then back at the window. "You don't get used to them," he said. "You just decide what they'll mean." A few rows back, a young mother with a toddler whispered to her child, "That man helped make things right." The little boy, no older than 5, whispered back, "He didn't even yell." Elias heard it. The words brushed something deep in him, the reminder that dignity could be louder than rage. Captain Miller walked up the aisle quietly and stopped beside him. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I want to personally apologize. What happened shouldn't have occurred on any flight, let alone this one." Elias met his gaze. "I appreciate that, Captain, but don't apologize for them. Lead better than they did." Miller nodded solemnly. "I intend to—" Just then, the plane's door reopened briefly. A new flight attendant entered Tanya, mid-30s, confident yet kind-eyed. She approached Elias first. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "I read your firm's work. It's good to see justice working in real time." He smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure it stays that way." The door sealed once again. Engines roared back to life. Passengers buckled up, still whispering about what they'd witnessed. The story was already spreading through texts, posts, and whispers, but Elias wasn't thinking about the public reaction. He was thinking about what came next. He reached for his phone again, typing a brief message to Patricia Reynolds. "I want this handled beyond one flight. Call a press review. We'll announce a new passenger equity policy." She responded almost instantly. "Understood. Drafting statement now." Elias slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket and exhaled. For the first time that morning, he felt a flicker of peace, not because the problem was solved, but because the silence had finally spoken for something larger than him. As the plane finally began to taxi, Helen smiled across the aisle. "You grounded them before we even left the ground." Elias turned his head slightly, a glint of wry humor in his eyes. Sometimes you have to stop moving to make progress. The engines roared louder. The wheels rolled forward. But beneath the noise, everyone knew they weren't just traveling to Seattle anymore. They were carrying a story, one that had already taken flight without leaving the runway. The engines hummed again, but the sound wasn't the same. It carried something heavier now, the weight of realization. Passengers shifted in their seats, restless yet strangely reverent, as if aware they had just witnessed a turning point. The aircraft had not left the ground, but it had traveled far from where it began that morning. Elias Carter sat quietly in 1A, the faint glow of the window light painting his reflection across the glass. His tie was slightly loosened, his posture relaxed but alert. The storm that had been building for over an hour had finally broken. Yet he remained calm, as if he had expected the rain all along. Tanya, the new flight attendant, moved gracefully down the aisle, checking on passengers. Her voice was soft, her presence grounding. When she reached Elias, she lowered her tone. "Everything's stable now," she said. "You handled that with grace I've never seen before." He looked up, his voice almost a whisper. "Grace doesn't always come naturally. Sometimes it's just the only thing left." She smiled gently. Still, it changed the room. Across the aisle, Helen Brooks caught his eye again. "You do realize," she said, leaning slightly forward, "this will go viral within an hour." "Right." Elias gave a small, resigned smile. "I'm sure it already has." Indeed, several passengers were already typing furiously on their phones. Hashtags were forming. No, grounded for justice. Elias Carter. Bo, seat 1A. Photos of Mark and Paula being escorted off the plane had begun circulating online. The video Helen had quietly captured Elias sitting calm and dignified, while chaos brewed around him was already gathering shares. Rita, who had made the brave announcement earlier, approached timidly. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "corporate just called again. They want to thank you for handling it professionally." He turned his gaze toward her, his tone kind but direct. "Tell them professionalism doesn't erase a pattern. It just gives them another chance to fix it." She nodded, visibly humbled. "I will." As she walked away, Captain Miller's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received clearance for departure. Thank you again for your understanding. We'll be in the air shortly." A soft applause filled the cabin. Elias didn't join in, but he closed his eyes briefly. He wasn't celebrating a victory, he was taking inventory of the moment, the lesson, the cost, the quiet echo of all the other times something like this had happened without witnesses. The plane began to taxi slowly. Outside, sunlight slid across the wet runway, bright but forgiving. Tanya came by again, offering warm towels. Elias accepted one, nodding in thanks. "Would you like a drink before takeoff?" she asked. "Water's fine," he said. Robert Daniels, sitting one row behind, finally broke his silence. "Look," he said awkwardly, "I just want to say I didn't realize who you were." Elias turned slightly, his voice calm. "That's exactly the problem. Mr. Daniels, you shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them properly." Robert swallowed, the words landing like a weight he couldn't shift. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I was out of line." Elias offered a small nod, not absolution, but acknowledgement, then learned from it. That's the only apology that matters. The engines roared louder as the plane rolled onto the main runway. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the rhythmic voice of the safety video began. Passengers listened more attentively than usual, their minds still anchored to what had just unfolded. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Elias looked down at the shrinking airport. He thought about the thousands of people who pass through those terminals every day, each carrying invisible stories of assumption, bias, or quiet dignity. Maybe this one small moment would ripple outward, unseen but felt. At cruising altitude, the cabin lights softened. Tanya returned with meals, her professionalism a comforting rhythm that stitched normalcy back into the room. When she reached Elias again, she said, "Mr. Carter, Patricia Reynolds wanted to know if she could call you after landing." He smiled faintly. "She can, but I'll call her first." Helen chuckled lightly from across the aisle. "You sound like a man who's already planning his next move." Elias looked at her with quiet humor. "I never stopped." He unfolded his tablet, opening a blank document titled Equity in the Air Draft 1. He began typing notes, his fingers steady on the screen. Every system has blind spots. Every blind spot hides a person. The goal isn't to punish individuals, but to reprogram the design that taught them to doubt what fairness looks like. He paused, glancing at the word reprogram. He liked that word. It didn't destroy, it rebuilt. Helen watched him for a moment, then said, "You really think they'll listen?" He nodded slightly. "They have no choice now. But that's not why I do it. I do it because someone always watches what you do in silence, a kid, a colleague, a stranger, and it teaches them how to stand without shouting." For a few moments, there was only the soft hum of the engines. Tanya poured coffee for passengers. A few people smiled at Elias as they passed to the restroom. Nods of respect, unspoken but clear. The atmosphere, once tense, had turned reflective. As the flight continued, Elias leaned back and thought about Lena. He could almost hear her voice teasing him. "Did you stay calm again, Dad?" "Yes," he whispered under his breath. "But next time, I hope you won't have to." When the seatbelt sign flicked off, Captain Miller appeared again, walking down the aisle. He stopped beside 1A. "Mr. Carter, I wanted you to know corporate issued a system-wide review just now. They're calling it the Horizon Ethics Response." Elias raised an eyebrow. "That was quick." "They're scared," Miller admitted. "But maybe that's how change starts. Sometimes fear's just another word for awareness," Elias said quietly. Miller smiled faintly, then returned to the cockpit. Rita, still visibly shaken but trying, walked past carrying a tray. "Would you like another drink?" "Sir? No? Thank you," Elias said. "You've done enough for today." She stopped, hesitating. "I hope one day I can do better." He met her eyes. "You just started." She nodded and moved on, her shoulders lighter than before. The rest of the flight passed in silence, not the heavy kind, but the kind that follows understanding. Elias read through his notes, refining the statement he would make after landing. He wasn't drafting a complaint, he was writing a blueprint. When the plane began its descent, Tanya came over the intercom. "We'll be landing in approximately 15 minutes. Thank you for flying Horizon Air." As the city of Seattle came into view, Elias gazed down at the skyline. Towers reflected the morning light, their glass faces gleaming like the surface of calm water. It looked peaceful from above, deceptively peaceful, he thought. The higher you fly, the easier it is to forget what turbulence feels like. But he hadn't forgotten. He carried every second of this morning with him, etched in quiet precision. When the wheels touched down, the cabin erupted in applause, not the usual clapping for a safe landing, but something deeper, gratitude, maybe, or admiration for the calm man in 1A who had changed the course of their morning and perhaps their understanding. Helen leaned over once more as the plane slowed. You know, Mr. Carter, not everyone could have handled that with your composure. He smiled softly. Composure isn't the absence of emotion. It's emotion under discipline. The engines quieted as the plane taxied to the gate. Outside, compliance officers were waiting again. This time not for removal, but for dialogue. Horizon Air executives had flown in from headquarters to meet him. Patricia Reynolds stood at the front of the team, clipboard in hand, expression composed but clearly nervous. Elias rose from his seat, buttoned his jacket, and looked around the cabin one last time. He nodded to Tanya, to Helen, even to Robert, who avoided his gaze, but whispered, "Good luck." He smiled faintly. "Luck's for those who can't plan. I'll rely on reason." As he stepped into the aisle, the passengers began to clap again, a softer sound than before, full of respect rather than spectacle. Elias acknowledged them with a quiet nod before exiting the aircraft. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The plane hadn't truly left the ground, yet something much heavier had taken flight accountability. The jet bridge hummed with the low mechanical sound of the airport waking up fully. Elias Carter stepped out of the aircraft into a corridor of faces. Curious passengers, tense staff, and a small group of executives waiting at the end. The light coming through the tall glass windows caught his profile, calm and deliberate, as if he'd just walked off a stage rather than a plane that never truly took off. Patricia Reynolds stood among them, posture rigid but eyes apologetic. She held a clipboard and a phone that had been buzzing nonstop since his call. When Elias approached, she took a step forward. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice low but respectful. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us before you continue your day." He adjusted his cufflinks, his tone even. "I didn't agree to speak." "Patricia, I agreed to listen." For a brief second, her throat tightened. "Understood. Let's find a quieter space." They moved into the Horizon Air Executive Lounge, which had been hastily cleared. The room smelled faintly of coffee and new leather, its sterile luxury at odds with the humanity of what had just occurred. A small group gathered Patricia, Captain Miller, 2 compliance officers, and the company's legal counsel, a younger man named David Ross, who looked both nervous and defensive. Patricia began, "Mr. Carter, first and foremost, I want to apologize for what happened today. What you experienced does not reflect our values." Elias looked at her steadily. "Then your values haven't been reflected in a long time." No one spoke. The silence pressed down like weight. Captain Miller cleared his throat softly. "I've already submitted my incident report. I'll cooperate with whatever internal review you conduct." Patricia nodded. "Thank you, Captain." She turned back to Elias. "Corporate will, of course, compensate you for the inconvenience." He interrupted her with a quiet laugh. "Compensation?" His tone wasn't angry, just deeply tired. "You think this is about a voucher?" Patricia hesitated. "Of course not. But it's customary to offer customary," Elias repeated softly, like doubting who belongs in a seat. David Ross shifted in his chair. "Mr. Carter, please understand that while what happened was unacceptable, it may have been an isolated incident." Elias leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady but sharp. "Do you believe bias is isolated, Mr. Ross? Or is it—" Systemic Ross faltered. "I'd say every company is still learning." Elias nodded. "Then let's stop pretending ignorance is education." Patricia lowered her clipboard. "You're right," she said quietly. "We can't fix this with apologies. Tell me what you need from us." Elias took a moment before answering. "What I need," he said, "is for you to understand that this isn't about me being humiliated. It's about your employees being trained to doubt people who look like me. That doubt isn't a mistake. It's a design flaw." He paused, letting the words land. "And designs can be changed." Patricia met his eyes. "You're talking about structural reform. I'm talking about accountability that doesn't vanish when the headlines fade." He turned toward Captain Miller. "You acted with integrity. Captain, keep doing that. The crew will follow the tone you set." Miller nodded, visibly humbled. "Thank you, sir." Elias looked back at Patricia. "As for your system, I propose a partnership. Carter Dynamics will provide consulting to re-engineer your passenger verification process using our ethics-coded AI. It eliminates bias triggers at the data entry level, but it also requires one thing your company has struggled with." Patricia tilted her head slightly. "Which is transparency," he said simply. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. "That's fair." Behind her, David Ross frowned slightly. "That kind of collaboration might raise compliance conflicts." "Mr. Carter, your firm is a vendor, not a governance partner." Elias looked at him. "Then maybe it's time to blur that line. Because governance without morality is just maintenance." Patricia smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides both admiration and fear. "You always did know how to turn a moment into a movement." "I don't want a movement," Elias said. "I want systems that don't require one." A knock interrupted the tension. Tanya, the new flight attendant, stood in the doorway holding a tablet. "Sorry to interrupt," she said softly, "but Mr. Carter, there's a call for you. It's your assistant." Elias took the device. "Anna," he said, "I'm in the meeting." "I know," she replied, her tone urgent but measured. "The story's spreading faster than we thought. The videos hit 800,000 views in under an hour. Hashtags are trending globally. News outlets are requesting statements." Elias exhaled slowly. "Then it's already out of our hands." Patricia looked uneasy. "We can still control the narrative if we release a statement now." Elias shook his head. "Control isn't the goal. Responsibility is." He ended the call, handed the tablet back to Tanya, and stood. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "Horizon Air will hold a press conference this afternoon. You'll issue an official apology, but not to me, to your passengers. You'll announce a new initiative under joint oversight, led by an independent ethics board. You'll name it something simple, something people can believe in." Patricia asked quietly. "What would you call it?" Elias thought for a moment. "The 1A protocol," he said. "A reminder that everyone deserves the seat they earned." The room went still. Even Ross, for all his skepticism, looked moved. Patricia finally spoke. "Then that's what it'll be. The 1A protocol." Elias nodded once. "Good. Let's start there." He gathered his coat, preparing to leave. But before he could, Patricia said softly, "Mr. Carter, may I ask you one question?" He turned slightly. "Go ahead. What made you stay so calm? Most people in your position would have walked off the plane." He looked out the window at the distant runway. "Because walking off would have proved their point that I didn't belong there. Sometimes the only way to win is to stay seated." For a long moment, no one spoke. When he stepped out of the lounge, a crowd had gathered beyond the gate passengers, reporters, and staff. Phones were raised, lights flashing. The hum of conversation filled the air like the low thrum of electricity. A reporter called out, "Mr. Carter, is it true you grounded the plane yourself?" He stopped, met her eyes, and said quietly, "No." The truth grounded itself. Another voice asked, "What happens next?" He smiled faintly. "Next, we build something better." As he walked away, Helen Brooks emerged from the gate area, still holding her phone. She caught up with him and said softly, "I've seen a lot of things in my life, Mr. Carter, but I've never seen grace disarm power like that." He smiled gently. "Then I hope you record that part too." She laughed. "Already did." They parted at the terminal's intersection, two strangers whose paths had crossed at the exact moment the world needed witnesses. Outside the glass, another Horizon Air flight lifted into the sky, its silver wings flashing in the light. The day looked ordinary again, but something fundamental had shifted. Elias Carter paused before exiting the terminal. His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass calm, resolved, unbowed. He took out his phone one last time and sent a message to Anna Draft Partnership Agreement. Title, The 1A Protocol, include diversity accountability metrics, bias audits, and public transparency clause. Then another message followed, and schedule a call with Lena tonight. I need to tell her why sitting still can sometimes move mountains. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and stepped into the sunlight, the noise of the airport fading behind him. For once, the world outside didn't feel as heavy. Change, he thought, was like gravity inevitable, once enough weight demanded movement. And in that morning's 12 minutes of stillness, the world had begun to shift. By noon, the story had become unavoidable. Every major news outlet had picked it up. Every social platform was flooded with clips, commentary, and hashtags. Seat 1A was trending at number 1 across the country. The phrase 12 minutes that grounded a plane appeared in headlines from New York to Los Angeles. People weren't just talking about one flight anymore. They were talking about a system. At Horizon Air's downtown Seattle headquarters, the press conference room had been transformed overnight. Rows of journalists filled the space. Microphones lined the podium, and screens displayed the airline's logo alongside a new phrase in bold blue letters, the 1A Protocol: equity, accountability, dignity. Patricia Reynolds stood near the stage, smoothing her blazer nervously. She'd been in corporate crises before, but none like this. This wasn't a PR disaster. It was a moral reckoning, the kind that couldn't be spun, only faced. The doors opened, and Elias Carter walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a navy shirt. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to announce himself. Conversation stopped instantly. Every camera turned toward him. Patricia stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming." He nodded. "Let's make this count." A murmur of camera shutters followed him to the stage. The hum of flashes, whispers, and typing filled the room. Patricia took the podium first, her voice firm but deliberate. "Good afternoon. As Regional Director of Horizon Air, I want to address the events that occurred this morning on Flight 726 from Austin to Seattle. What happened to Mr. Elias Carter was unacceptable, not just as a failure of policy, but as a failure of humanity. This airline was built on the belief that every passenger deserves dignity, safety, and respect. Today, we were reminded how far we still have to go." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. Effective immediately, Horizon Air is launching the 1A Protocol, a comprehensive ethics and equity initiative co-developed with Carter Dynamics. This program will introduce bias audits, mandatory empathy training, and AI-assisted passenger verification designed to eliminate discriminatory triggers. It's not a one-time correction. It's a permanent shift in how we define service. The room erupted with questions, but Patricia lifted her hands slightly. "Before we continue, Mr. Carter would like to share a few words. Elias stepped to the microphone. His tone was measured, his gaze steady, his presence commanding in its stillness. "Thank you, Patricia," he said. "I didn't come here for an apology. I came here for accountability. And accountability starts with truth." He looked directly at the sea of cameras. "This morning, I boarded Flight 726 with a confirmed first-class ticket. The system flagged my reservation. I was told to move seats. I was asked to verify my identity. I wasn't the first person that's happened to, and I won't be the last if we don't change something deeper than the procedures." A ripple of silence spread through the crowd. Every reporter leaned forward. "Racism doesn't always shout," he continued. "Sometimes it whispers through systems built without awareness. Sometimes it hides behind the word policy. Sometimes it's just a pause before someone decides if you belong." He took a breath, the quiet in the room absolute. "I didn't raise my voice because the system already made enough noise. I just stayed seated until the world looked up. And now, the question is, will we keep looking, or will we blink and move on?" The words landed like soft thunder, calm but undeniable. Patricia stood beside him, visibly moved. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we will keep looking." A reporter called out, "Mr. Carter, do you intend to sue Horizon Air?" Elias smiled faintly. "No. My goal isn't litigation. It's transformation. You can't sue culture into changing. You build frameworks that make it impossible for ignorance to hide." Another voice asked, "Why partner with the very company that wronged you?" He paused for a beat, then replied, "Because reforming from within is harder, and therefore more powerful. Real change doesn't come from burning bridges. It comes from rebuilding them so others can cross safely." Patricia watched him, the sincerity in his tone breaking through every corporate layer she'd built over the years. She realized she wasn't just working with a CEO. She was standing beside a teacher. After the formal questions, the floor opened for brief interviews. Tanya, the flight attendant who had replaced Paula, stepped up quietly from the back. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice trembling, "I just wanted to thank you. You didn't just change this company. You reminded us what integrity looks like." He smiled warmly. "Keep that memory. You'll need it when the next person doubts whether standing up is worth it." A round of light applause spread through the reporters, not for the corporate statement, but for the humanity of the moment. As the press conference ended, Patricia approached him privately. "Elias," she said softly, "you know this doesn't end today. The board's nervous. Investors are already asking questions about whether this partnership will make us too political." He gave a faint, wry smile. "Treating people fairly isn't political. It's profitable in the long run. They'll see that once the numbers come in." Patricia tilted her head. "You think this will translate into business results?" He nodded. "Culture always does. Bias costs more than lawsuits. It costs trust. And trust is the only currency that compounds faster than profit." She looked at him for a long moment, then exhaled. "You really believe we can fix this?" He met her eyes. "Only if we stop trying to fix people and start fixing the systems that teach them who to doubt." A flicker of hope crossed her face. "Then I'll hold you to that." "Mr. Carter, please do," he said with a faint smile. "Accountability should be mutual." By evening, clips of the press conference flooded every major news network. Commentators debated its implications. Analysts discussed the financial impact. But online, the public conversation was different. It wasn't about airlines or CEOs anymore. It was about quiet power. about what it meant to sit still until justice moved. Helen Brooks uploaded her full recording that night, captioned with 6 words. He didn't raise his voice once. The video surpassed 10 million views before midnight. In a small apartment in Chicago, a single mother watched the clip with her son and whispered, "That's how change begins." In Atlanta, a retired pilot replayed the press conference and murmured, "It's about time." And in a quiet home office in Austin, Lena Carter watched her father's face on the screen, calm, poised, unwavering, and smiled through tears. She opened her notebook and wrote in bold letters, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits." At the same moment, Elias sat alone in his hotel room, tie loosened, jacket off, the city glowing faintly through the window. He finally allowed himself a deep breath. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only reflection. He looked at his phone, hundreds of messages from executives, journalists, and strangers. But one stood out, a text from Patricia. "The 1A protocol draft is approved. Board votes tomorrow." He smiled faintly and typed back, "Then tomorrow. We start flying, right?" He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. Outside, planes traced thin silver lines across the night sky, each one a reminder that movement, when done with purpose, was the closest thing to grace. He closed his eyes, the hum of the city blending with memory. He could almost hear Lena's laugh, feel her hand tugging at his sleeve when she was little, asking why he worked so much. "For days like this," he whispered, "so you won't have to." And with that, Elias Carter, the man who had grounded a plane to lift a principal, finally let himself rest. The world would wake up different tomorrow. The sun rose over Seattle, gold and clean after a stormy night. The city buzzed with quiet anticipation. News anchors spoke the same name across every channel, Elias Carter. Morning headlines glowed across coffee shop screens. CEO who grounded a plane sparks nationwide policy shift. The nation hadn't just seen a viral clip. They had seen calm become a catalyst. Inside his hotel suite overlooking Puget Sound, Elias woke before dawn, not to read headlines but to watch the water move. He had always believed silence spoke louder when you chose where to place it. The sound of the ocean outside was steady, patient, almost like breathing. For the first time in days, he let himself feel tired, the kind of fatigue that comes after carrying something heavier than pride. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Anna. His assistant board vote passed unanimously. Horizon Air announces the 1A protocol at noon. Another message followed seconds later. CNN requests a live interview. CBS too. You'll have to pick one. Elias set the phone aside. He wasn't ready for interviews yet. He wanted to see how the world had reacted first, not in headlines, but in hearts. Downstairs, the hotel lobby was unrecognizable. Reporters clustered near the revolving doors, cameras ready. When Elias entered, the crowd turned instantly, a wave of murmurs rippling through. But he didn't stop for photos. Instead, he walked calmly through, giving a nod to the security guards who'd been stationed since last night. Outside, Seattle's air was crisp and clear. He stepped into a waiting car where Patricia Reynolds was already seated. She looked exhausted, but lighter than before. "You saw the coverage?" she asked. He nodded. "It's everywhere." The board's ecstatic now that the market responded positively. She said, "Stocks up 3% overnight. But I think the real win is moral. The message is coming in. People are thanking us. Elias, not just customers, employees, gate staff, crew, even retired pilots. They're saying they finally feel seen." Elias smiled faintly, Good. That means the change reached where it mattered. Patricia hesitated. There's something else. The FAA called this morning. They want to explore adopting parts of the 1A protocol industry-wide. They said your framework could become a national ethics model for aviation. He turned toward her, genuinely surprised. That fast, they said reform travels at the speed of fear. She said, and yesterday made a lot of companies nervous. He chuckled quietly. Let's hope it turns fear into conscience. The car pulled up to Horizon's headquarters, where a small stage had been set up for a public statement. Banners hung with the new slogan, the 1A Protocol Dignity in Motion. Employees lined the sidewalk, holding coffee cups and cautious smiles. For many of them, this was the first time they had ever seen a corporate executive walk hand in hand with accountability. Patricia turned to him as the car stopped. Ready always, he said, stepping out. The applause was subdued, but heartfelt. The sound wasn't loud. It was human. The kind of applause that says thank you for not shouting when you had every reason to. Patricia took the microphone first. Yesterday, our airline was forced to confront a painful truth that dignity cannot be assumed. It must be built. Today, we stand with Mr. Carter to make sure it's never in question again. She gestured for him to speak. Elias stepped up to the microphone, looking out over the faces workers, executives, even passengers who had shown up just to witness what change looked like in person. Good morning, he began. Yesterday, I was just a traveler trying to get home. But what happened on that plane reminded me home isn't a destination. It's a feeling. It's the sense that you belong where you are. No one should have to prove they belong. He paused, scanning the crowd. This protocol we've built isn't about punishment. It's about redesigning trust. It's about making sure that every process, every policy, every seat assignment carries dignity in its code. The audience was silent, hanging on each word. The 1A protocol isn't just for planes. It's for classrooms, offices, hospitals, anywhere a decision can be influenced by assumption. It's a framework for fairness that says before you decide who belongs, remember why you serve. Patricia's eyes glistened slightly as she stood to the side. She'd been in countless press events, but this felt different. It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded lived. As Elias stepped back, the employees began clapping, louder this time, steady and rhythmic. A few shouted thank you from the back. It wasn't celebration, it was relief. After the speech, journalists crowded him with questions, but he politely declined. Let the protocol speak for itself, he said, before heading inside Horizon's boardroom. The atmosphere was strangely calm. No arguments, no posturing, just quiet acknowledgement that the company had crossed a line it could never uncross. On the table lay a framed document, the official adoption notice of the 1A protocol, co-signed by Elias and Patricia. David Ross, the legal counsel who had once questioned the partnership, approached Elias hesitantly. Mr. Carter, he said, I wanted to say I was wrong about how I saw this. I thought you were trying to embarrass the company, but now I see you were trying to teach it. Elias extended a hand. Then consider the lesson shared. Ross smiled awkwardly. Relief visible. I think this will outlive all of us. That's the point, Elias replied. Later that afternoon, Elias stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The sun reflected on the water below, each ripple catching light like glass. Patricia joined him quietly. You changed something real today, she said. He looked thoughtful. No, we did. I just gave it a name. She nodded. smiling. "Still, thank you for not walking away." He turned to her, expression soft but firm. "Walking away doesn't change systems. Staying does," before they could say more. Anna called, "Elias, you're trending again, but for the right reasons this time. Teachers are using your speech in classrooms. A hospital in Denver announced it's adopting a 1A pledge for patient care. Even a school district in Georgia reached out. It's spreading beyond aviation." Elias exhaled slowly, emotion flickering across his face. "That's bigger than I imagined." Anna's voice softened. "You started something good." He smiled. "Then let's make sure it doesn't end with me." That night, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Elias finally took a moment alone on the rooftop terrace of the Horizon building. The sky burned orange and violet, and the city buzzed softly below. He looked down at his reflection in the glass wall, older, steadier, but still carrying the quiet defiance that had made him stay seated on that flight. His phone buzzed again, a video message from Lena. She was sitting in her dorm room, eyes bright. "Dad," she said, smiling, "I saw everything. The world saw it too. You didn't just change a company, you showed people what respect looks like. I'm proud of you." He watched the clip twice, then typed back, "Proud of you too, sweetheart. This was for you, for every future traveler who won't have to fight for their seat." He slipped the phone into his pocket and looked out over the lights of the city. Somewhere out there, another plane was climbing into the sky, not just carrying passengers, but carrying a promise. And for the first time in a long while, Elias Carter smiled not from satisfaction, but from peace. He knew what would come next: scrutiny, politics, backlash, but none of that mattered. The truth had taken flight. The system had blinked, and now it would never see the world the same way again. 3 days later, the glow of applause began to fade, replaced by the glare of scrutiny. News anchors now spoke with sharper tones. Opinion columns debated whether the 1A protocol was genuine reform or corporate theater. Pundits questioned Elias Carter's motives, calling him everything from a visionary to a manipulator. The internet that had lifted his name now began to test its weight. Inside Carter Dynamics headquarters in Austin, Elias sat in the glass-walled conference room with his executive team. The air was tense. Reports and analytics filled the screens, a flood of articles, stock charts, and public sentiment graphs that swung wildly between admiration and backlash. Anna stood beside him, reading from her tablet. Morning brief. Horizon Air's stock is stabilizing, but several competitors are pushing back. Liberty Sky and Aeromax both released statements saying they don't believe in algorithmic ethics models. Their investors are calling this performative activism. Elias leaned back in his chair, voice calm. Of course they are. Systems resist correction the same way people do. Patricia joined via video call, her face framed by the Horizon office skyline behind her. "The pushback's expected," she said. "But internally, things are improving. Our flight crews are reporting fewer incidents, and employee satisfaction's up 12% in 72 hours. That's not theater, that's traction." Elias nodded. "Good. Let's focus on impact, not noise." But even as he said it, he knew noise mattered. In the modern world, perception shaped policy, and there were people determined to twist his message. The door opened, and David Ross entered the room, holding a printed document. His posture was stiffer than usual. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we have a situation. Someone leaked internal memos from your company suggesting that Carter Dynamics would gain proprietary access to Horizon's passenger data through the 1A protocol. It's not true, but it's spreading fast." Anna's eyes widened. They're framing it as a power grab. Elias took the document, scanning it quickly. Who leaked it? We don't know yet, Ross said, but social media's running with it. People are calling it the new surveillance disguised as equality. Elias sighed, setting the paper down. So fairness is controversial now. Patricia frowned on screen. You should make a statement. Elias, get ahead of it before it grows. He shook his head. Not yet. Words are cheap in the first 24 hours of outrage. Let's give truth a moment to surface before we feed it noise. But by afternoon, the pressure was rising. His inbox overflowed with requests for comment. Activist groups demanded transparency reports. Former critics of Horizon Air seized the opportunity to reframe the story. The same headlines that once called him the calm catalyst now read, Did Elias Carter trade ethics for access at 5 that evening? Anna entered his office quietly. You've got one scheduled interview left with NBC. You can cancel it. He looked up from his notes. No, I'll do it. Even after all this, especially after this. When he arrived at the studio, the lights were colder, harsher. The anchor, a woman named Julia Miles, greeted him politely but without warmth. Mr. Carter, she began once the cameras rolled. Your initiative has been praised as groundbreaking, but critics now say it's a corporate data mining scheme dressed as social justice. How do you respond? Elias folded his hands, his tone steady. I'd ask them one question if protecting dignity requires transparency. Why do they fear what transparency reveals? Julia hesitated, not expecting the counter-question. You're saying your system doesn't collect personal information? I'm saying it collects behavior, not identity. It tracks where bias enters process flow. It teaches systems to pause before they discriminate. We don't need personal data to find prejudice. We need honesty. Julia studied him, then leaned forward. Do you think people are tired of moral crusades in corporate boardrooms? He smiled faintly. If morality feels exhausting, maybe it's because too few have carried it for too long. The studio fell quiet for a heartbeat. The control room lights blinked. Producers exchanged glances. Julia's expression softened slightly. That's quite a perspective. Mr. Carter, it's not perspective. He said, it's experience. I lived it at 30,000 feet. After the broadcast, the clip spread again this time, not as controversy, but as clarity. People began quoting him online. We don't need personal data to find prejudice. The line became a rallying phrase for ethical tech advocates. By the next morning, the tide began to turn again. Major publications retracted their harsher takes. The leak was traced to a former consultant working for a rival airline lobby. Horizon's PR team released a statement verifying that Carter Dynamics had no access to private information-only compliance frameworks. Patricia called him early, sounding relieved. The truth won. Elias smiled lightly. It always does. It just arrives late to its own party. She laughed. You're impossible to rattle. Not impossible, he said. Just unwilling. That afternoon, Elias returned to his home in Austin for the first time in weeks. The house was quiet, filled with the scent of pine from the garden outside. He loosened his tie and walked to his office, where framed photos of Lena at various ages lined the shelf from her first bicycle to her college graduation. He sat down and opened his journal, not the digital one, but the leather-bound book he'd kept since his first job out of grad school. The page was blank, waiting. He began to write. Power doesn't always corrupt. Sometimes it reveals character. The higher you climb, the more oxygen you lose, and the more tempted you are to breathe arrogance instead of empathy. The challenge isn't to stay above others, it's to lift them higher while keeping your feet on solid ground. He paused, running a hand over the page. Then he added, "Yesterday they doubted I belonged in first class. Today, they want me to lead an industry. Tomorrow, I'll still just be a man teaching machines what fairness looks like." His phone buzzed a video call from Lena. Her smile filled the screen. "Dad, I saw the interview. You didn't even blink." He chuckled softly. "If I blink, the wrong people win." She laughed. "I think the right people already did." They talked for nearly an hour about her classes, her friends, her plans for grad school. For the first time in a while, he didn't feel like a headline. He felt like a father again. Before hanging up, Lena said something that stayed with him. "You know, Dad, I think grace isn't silence, it's control. You taught me that." After the call ended, Elias sat for a long time in the stillness of his office. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the glass, tapping a rhythm like a quiet heartbeat. He closed his eyes, listening. He thought about the flight, the faces, the disbelief, and how a single act of restraint had turned into a blueprint for reform. But he also knew the storm wasn't over. Change always invited resistance, and he would face more of it before this journey was through. Still, for the first time, he wasn't angry about it. He felt something deeper, conviction. He turned back to his journal and wrote one final line before closing it for the night. "They grounded a plane. I grounded prejudice." And with that, Elias Carter rose from his chair, the rain outside blurring the city lights, his reflection half shadow, half fire. He wasn't done, but he no longer feared what came next. The test had only proven what the flight had already revealed. Calm could be revolutionary, and dignity, once awakened, was impossible to silence again. 2 months later, the story that had once dominated every headline had settled into something quieter, deeper, a shift in culture. Airlines across the nation were adopting parts of the 1A protocol. Universities were citing it in ethics courses, and business schools were holding discussions titled The Carter Method. The name Elias Carter had become shorthand for measured courage, but for Elias himself, fame had never been the goal. He preferred what came after the work that happened once the spotlight dimmed. That morning, he stood at a hangar on the outskirts of Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, watching a group of trainees in crisp uniforms run through simulations. These were Horizon Air's newest recruits, the first class to graduate under the 1A standard of conduct. Patricia Reynolds walked beside him, holding a clipboard. Her energy was different, now lighter, more certain. "You should see the surveys," she said proudly. "Training engagement is up 42%. Retention's higher. And, well, we haven't had a single bias-related complaint since launch." Elias nodded, quietly pleased. "It's working." Then, Patricia smiled. "It's working because you stayed involved. You could have walked away when the chaos hit." He looked toward the sky, the soft hum of aircraft overhead. "Walking away doesn't change the altitude," he said. "It just changes who learns to fly next." As they entered the hangar, the trainees straightened. Tanya, now promoted to head of in-flight training, saluted playfully. "Mr. Carter," she said, smiling. "We've been practicing the empathy modules you helped design. Would you like to observe a session?" He nodded. "Lead the way." The group gathered in a semicircle as Tanya explained. "We're going to run a scenario. Passenger discrepancy, seat verification, escalation control. But the point isn't the procedure, it's perception." The simulation began. A young attendant named Maya Torres played the lead role. her voice trembling slightly as she enacted the part of a flight attendant confronting a passenger she assumed was in the wrong seat. Halfway through, she faltered. Elias watched closely, then raised a hand. "Pause there," he said softly. The room stilled. "What did you feel right before you spoke?" he asked her. Maya hesitated. "I guess uncertainty. I wanted to sound confident, but I also felt afraid of being wrong." Elias nodded. "That's where bias hides not in hate, but in fear. Confidence built on fear always chooses control over compassion. Try again, but this time, start with curiosity instead of certainty." She nodded, took a breath, and redid the scene this time slower, gentler. Her tone shifted. The tension in the room dissolved. When it ended, Tanya smiled. "Beautifully done. That's the point, Grace under doubt." The trainees applauded softly. Elias stood, voice low but resonant. "You just demonstrated something systems can't automate: human awareness. Policies can correct action, but only empathy corrects instinct. Don't forget that." As the group dispersed, Patricia leaned closer and whispered, "You've turned training into philosophy." He smiled faintly. "Philosophy is just truth that learned patience." Later that day, he and Patricia met with Horizon's leadership team to review expansion plans. The FAA had officially endorsed the 1A protocol for all U.S. domestic carriers. Other industries, healthcare, education, finance, had begun requesting adaptation frameworks. The initiative had outgrown its origin. Patricia scrolled through her tablet. "We've been approached by Delta, MedAir, and the Department of Transportation. They want to form a consortium with Carter Dynamics to oversee a multi-sector ethics database." Elias raised an eyebrow. "So now everyone wants to belong to what they once resisted." "That's how reform works," she said. "First they mock it, then they measure it." He chuckled. "Then let's make sure they measure what matters." Later, standing by the window overlooking the tarmac, he felt something shift quietly inside him. Not pride, not vindication, but a sense of fulfillment that comes when a seed you planted finally blooms without you watching. He turned to Patricia. "When I grounded that flight, I wasn't trying to start a movement. I just wanted one little girl, somewhere, to see that silence can defend dignity." Patricia tilted her head. "You mean Lena." He smiled. "And everyone like her." That evening, he boarded a flight back to Austin. This time, he sat quietly in first class again, seat 1A, though now it felt symbolic rather than personal. Tanya had arranged it. She passed by before takeoff, whispering, "Full circle, sir." He smiled. "Let's hope it's a better journey this time." She winked. "We triple-checked your ticket." As the plane ascended, the cabin lights dimmed. The hum of engines filled the air. Elias looked out the window, where the clouds glowed under the setting sun, golden edges curling like silk. Around him, the passengers were calm, the attendants confident, the atmosphere peaceful. Halfway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We'd like to take a moment to recognize Mr. Elias Carter, on board today, the man who reminded the world that the sky belongs to everyone." Applause broke out across the cabin. Passengers turned, smiling toward him. Some clapped, others simply nodded. Elias felt heat rise to his face, not from pride, but humility. He stood briefly, offering a small wave. "Thank you," he said softly. "Just keep flying right." The rest of the journey passed in quiet serenity. As the plane descended into Austin, the city lights glittered below, like constellations reflected in motion. When they landed, Elias waited for everyone else to disembark first. Old habit, Only after the last passenger left did he rise, retrieving his bag. Tanya met him by the door. "We kept this for you," she said, handing him a small plaque shaped like a boarding pass. It read, "Seat 1A, a symbol of belonging." He smiled, eyes glistening faintly. "Thank you." As he walked through the terminal, his reflection flickered across glass panels. Tall, composed, aging gracefully. Outside, reporters were waiting, but this time he didn't rush past. He stopped, answered their questions with gentleness, not grandeur. "What's next?" "Mr. Carter one asked. He paused. Next he said thoughtfully, "We keep doing the quiet work, the kind that doesn't trend but transforms." The cameras clicked. Someone asked, "Do you ever think about that day? The flight that changed everything." Elias looked up, a soft smile crossing his face. "Every time I fly," he said, "not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. That day, hate didn't win. That's enough to remember." He turned and walked out into the evening air, the wind carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and rain. Overhead, another plane roared into the sky, its engines gleaming against the darkening horizon. He watched it climb until it disappeared into the clouds, his heart steady. When he reached the parking lot, his phone buzzed with a message from Lena Dad. "They showed your story at my university's leadership seminar today. My professor said you redefined modern accountability." Everyone clapped. Elias smiled and typed back, "I didn't redefine it. I just reminded them what it should look like." He slipped the phone away, started his car, and drove off into the dusk. The city lights blurred through the windshield, golden and soft like the promise of a world still learning to see clearly. The sky above him stretched wide, open, and endless, just as it should be. For everyone. Elias Carter's story teaches us something timeless, that true strength isn't loud, and justice doesn't always come from outrage. It comes from composure, integrity, and the courage to hold your ground with grace. In a world that often rewards noise, Elias chose silence, not weakness, but wisdom. He understood that staying seated was more powerful than standing in anger. For older generations, this lesson resonates deeply. We've all faced moments when we were underestimated, dismissed, or misunderstood. The instinct to fight back is natural, but sometimes the quiet act of not yielding speaks louder. Elias reminds us that dignity is not a reaction, it's a decision. He didn't just change an airline. He changed the culture of respect for everyone who comes after him. His calmness became a mirror, showing others who they were and who they could be. It's a reminder for all of us, no matter your age, your title, or your struggle. You always have the power to stand firm in your truth. And when you do, the world has no choice but to rise with you. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. Stories like this remind us that respect, compassion, and courage still matter, and that every act of grace can inspire change. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue telling powerful stories that speak truth and bring hope. Together, let's keep the conversation and the compassion alive.